One beautiful. Now the real Turkmen, it's like North Korea. The real Turkmenbashi has died, unfortunately, after many years in office. But he had used his time in office to have a new currency that was named after himself. And then he had new months, new names for the months of the year and for the days of the week, which were named somehow after the family of his wife. And that was very great. And he had also put out a lot of books about himself. So there was some sort of secret relationship probably with other countries. And for a time I had his book, and I was somehow interested in how Turkmenistan was going, and I lost a little bit of sight. But now they have one of the highest prison rates in the world. That's for all these people who could not memorize the new days of the week and didn't buy his book. But I bought it.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm not in prison.
Like
Yes. St. Kitts and Nevis, also beautiful tiny islands in the Caribbean, 607, you just wouldn't believe it. And the United States, here we have 666. There are very different numbers depending on everything. And then, for many years, for people who were critical criminologists who were talking bad about the United States, and they would always bash the United States. They have the highest rate of imprisonment in the whole world, worse than China, worse than Russia, worse than Cuba. And for many years, critical criminologists had to say, well, they have the second, or you said, they have the highest rate in the world, isn't that terrible? And then somebody from the audience would say, no, they don't have the highest rate. The highest rate is in Seychelles. And then you would look up the Seychelles. How come the Seychelles are worse than the United States? No. Okay. Now first we have to have a short look at the Seychelles. Where are the Seychelles? That's the first question. Does anybody know where they are? Yeah, east coast of Africa. And what you say now? How beautiful are the Seychelles?
But it's good for pirates from Somalia.
Yeah, that's right. So, but they are so beautiful. Well, I cannot make it bigger. And Cousin Island, Curious Island, and they have a lot of national parks, and you just wouldn't believe how beautiful everything is. Okay. Some of the most beautiful places, but in all these beautiful places as we have seen in the Caribbean, but also east of Africa, nowadays they have extreme prison rates, homicide rates, etc. And what about the Seychelles? As Mauricio said, yeah, they have a prison for pirates, and they are not Seychelles pirates, they are pirates from Somalia. And Somalia is a country where the United Nations would not send a prisoner because you wouldn't know whom to talk to. And so they take the Somali pirates that they grab on the high seas, and they put them in prison in the Seychelles. You must have a little treaty with the United Nations, and the states get some money for it. But that is not the real reason why they have such a high imprisonment rate. They have this exceedingly high rate of imprisonment. And that is not the real reason. Even if you subtract the pirates, they still have had the highest imprisonment rate of the whole world. And that makes it interesting. Why do they have, I mean, they have islands, of course, like in Norway, even better. And since the Norwegians use islands as prisons, it is, of course, also an idea to say, well, we have this beautiful island, why not put everybody in prison? But it's not like that. Well, I will just go here. I don't know, I will go to Seychelles here. Seychelles, in Crimpedia. Crimpedia tells us they have 115 islands, but most of which are uninhabited. Most of the people live there. First it was French. Well, first nobody lived there. They don't have Aborigines. They are so far away from everything that actually nobody lived there. And when the French came, they found only these beautiful islands. No prisoners, no prisons, no Aborigines, no indigenous people. Then came the British and reorganized everything. But it's a beautiful mixture of people. There's a French high class, there's a British upper class, and there are people from Malaysia, from India, from China, from Kenya, from Somalia, German tourists, American tourists. There are hotels for $1,800 American dollars per night. Every now and then you find dead tourists there who have snorted too much cocaine. And here we come to the reason why they have so many people in prison. First of all, the social spread is enormous. There are very many rich people, and there are very many, well, not so many, poor people. But it's going like this. The rich are getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. And that's not a good sign for any society. That is one of the most important root causes for anomie, crime, and criminalization. So they have a certain inequality in that country, and then they happen to be on the route of opium from Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia to West Africa, South Africa, and all sorts of. And Iran is having a big opium problem. As you know, Afghanistan has always had a big opium consumption, not necessarily a problem. In Iran, they have a big consumption right now and a big problem right now. And in East Africa, everything is in turmoil. So this is an important place for drugs to come for tourists, but also to be transported. And as everywhere where you have these exceedingly high imprisonment rates, it does only take about 15 minutes and you have the drug trade. I didn't know that about the Seychelles before. Now I know it. And what they have then is, they have American-style drug laws. That is, they have high minimum sentences, and no maximum can go until 2 million years, etc. So if you're on a trafficking route, and you have American-style drug policy, then you have American-style incarceration rates. It's so easy. And you can subtract the pirates, you still have this exceedingly high, top quality incarceration. So that's all. And now what did they do? Well, in late 2015, they reviewed some of the drug sentences, and they said, well, maybe we have put some very tiny people with very big sentences in prison. Let's have a look. And they had a look. Oh yeah, that's a very tiny person. They had 150 tiny persons in prison, and they let them out. And since the whole population of the Seychelles is below 100,000 people, to let 150 people out is a lot of people, and suddenly they fell down in the list of incarceration rates. And now they're in the 400s, which is still extremely high, but it's far away from the 600, 700, 800, etc. Unfortunately, they let these 150 people out of prison at a time when they introduced a new drug law that was even worse. So it was a sign of clemency. We are nice to the small people, but we are very tough to the bad people. and they are certainly on the way to fight for the place number one again with the United States in the future. But at the moment, they lost the number one place. So not everybody knows it, that at the moment, the Seychelles have lost place number one, and now for a time we can still, or again, say the worst country in the world with the imprisonment rate is the United States. And nobody can say, no, it's the Seychelles. So I learned a lot about Seychelles because they had this number one spot, and now they lost it, and I know how beautiful it is there. It's really very beautiful. Okay. Oh yeah, this is getting very personal. As I said, what I like, what I don't like. What I like, of course, is the Human Rights Watch people, and also the incarceration rate list, and also the Innocence Project. Just a few words about the Innocence Project because it has to do with prison. You may have heard about it. It's an invention of two legal scholars from New York, and they started this project to get innocent people out of prison, and especially out of death row, where they are awaiting execution. And they have saved the lives of many people, especially since the DNA technology advanced. And that was surprising how many people had been convicted of murder to death and were awaiting their execution. And since the DNA thing came, whenever these Innocence Project people said, well, this case looks a little shady, and they followed it up, pro bono, etc. In so many cases, it was proven that these people who said, I'm innocent, you know, as they all say on death row. But for many, and professionals who work in prisons say, oh yeah, don't give me that. You know? But then suddenly, well, in many cases, it's true, they're innocent. You know? And then they're being left out. And the good thing about the United States is when you sit for a long time and you're proven innocent and you're left out of prison, you really get a good indemnization. It's not that you get $20 on your hand and have to go to the next Burger King and that's it. You can get millions. Some people really, just because they spent 35 years on death row, they come out with $2 or $3 or $4 million. That's not bad. Other people sit in offices for 35 years and after 35 years have nothing. So, provided you're not executed, of course, and if everything goes bad, you're executed before the innocent people will find out and before you will be released. And that, as we can know now, this must have been happening very, very often in the past. And everywhere in the world, not only in the States, but in Congo, they don't care so much about DNA and things. Okay, the Innocence Project, a fantastic invention, and still today, I think John Grisham, he has not written a single non-fiction book. I think that's still true today. He has written one non-fiction book, and that is called The Innocent Man. And that, of course, exists in all languages of the world, and also in Portuguese, and I think it's called O Inocente. And it's a very good, it's a gripping book. And it's about this kind of thing. Somebody, that's a very good book of John. I mean, I used to be a fan of his. I somehow got tired after a while. After the 100th book, it's a little tired. But then I read O Inocente, and that was very beautiful, very good. Also, the description of the prison where I was sitting, that was some of an underground prison in Oklahoma. A pretty bad prison situation. Then there is Mauricio Dieters and Vitor Dieters, Latin American Prison Research Group on Facebook. That's a good idea.
There's not much going on.
Well, as
At least we got Roger Matthews and some other.
yeah, it's you're right. It's a potential.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a good potential. And then there's a Pew Institute. They're a good, very big foundation. I think the Pew family is if I'm not completely mistaken, it's an oil family, oil dynasty of Texas, and somehow they must have some philanthropic trait and must have founded this institute, which does very good work. The Sentencing Project, also the subcommittee, UN subcommittee on prevention of torture. There's a facultative additional protocol to the Convention Against Torture by the United Nations. That is a very good protocol, and those countries that signed that protocol, they are on the good side. So, okay, and the World Prison Brief is very good in its data on how the prison situation is actually. That's a very good source. Okay. Yeah, and then one little theory that I want to publish right now in this minute. I want to make public a new theory. And the new theory is the following. It's the easy one. But most good ones are easy ones, like enemy theory and things like that. The new theory about prisons is that we are coming full circle, in two full circles. One full circle is the birth of the prison, according to Michel Foucault, was linked to the cell prison, the invention of the single cell prison and solitary confinement. And history has shown that solitary confinement drove people mad and into suicide and didn't work, etc. The Quakers had thought it would be everything fine, and it was not. So solitary confinement gave way to more open prisons, and especially the Irish system, the progressive system. You would not spend the whole time in one single cell with no contacts like the Quakers had imagined, but you were in a progressive system. It would be difficult in the beginning, then you would behave better, you would get privileges, you would get out of prison for a day, you would have vacations from prison like they have in Germany. You have, your grandmother is sick, you can take a sick leave to visit your grandmother. Your grandmother dies, you go to the funeral, then you need vacations and you get vacations from prison. So that, the Puritans had never thought of these kind of things. So then you have the halfway houses, half open prisons, Bastoy, etc. So my theory is we are getting back to the Puritans because there's a new phase of solitary confinement, just without God, because God has died. So we are full circle. We have opened the prisons and now we're closing them again. And the second part of the theory, which happens to be a description more than a theory, is the moment the single cell prison was invented by the Quakers in 1790. What was the prison before? I don't even know how to call it. Before they just put people all together in stinky, hellish jails, unhygienic, and they put criminals together with mad people, sad people, people who didn't pay their debts, civil prisoners, young people, old people, sick people, women, men, children, everything. that was, you can call that however you want to call it. One could call it indiscriminate warehousing. That before the invention of the single-cell prison, people were just put there and nobody wanted to rehabilitate them. There was no social worker, no assistente social, and no advogado, especialmente também não. And so, they were all together. It was indiscriminate warehousing of people, and nobody gave a damn what was happening with them. So, and some of them were sentenced to prison by a judge, but most of the time the judges would put in their sentence, he goes to the prison for some time. Yeah, you go there for some time. And then it would be a matter of your health, your luck, of the warden, if your family had money to bribe the warden, etc. What that sometime would mean. But it would certainly not be 4 weeks and 3 days or something like that. Sometime. And then we'll see. Okay. That was indiscriminate warehousing. And the invention of the cell prison was, let's get over the indiscriminate warehousing, let's get to real penitentiaries. Now what we have today is, in the reality of the prison, for some prisoners there is a boom of solitary confinement, much more than 10 years ago, much more than 20 years ago. So we are going back full circle to solitary, but we are also going back full circle to indiscriminate warehousing. Because in many countries, you don't have a single cell for a single prisoner. You have a single cell for 20 or 30 sometimes. Or you have cells for 20 with 100. And that is not special. It's not special anymore. It used to be, oh, how terrible, how can that be? Today nobody says, oh, how terrible, how can that be? Because it is like this, it has been like this now for decades. For 1 decade, for 2 decades, I don't know, but at least for 2 decades, it has been like that. People are indiscriminately put in some place, nobody cares. So this is exactly the situation that John Howard had been encountering in the 1770s. If John Howard lived today, he would probably travel 160,000 kilometers, or even 1,600,000, circling the world around all the time, and he would write the same book that he has written in 1777. And he would type it on his notebook or talk it into his iPhone, but the result would be extremely similar to what he had described in 1777. It's filthy, impossible hygienic situation. This place has been built for 500 prisoners, and I counted 2,500, etc. And then he would speak with the warden, and the warden said, well, these people are like animals. It's like, you know, it's like 1777. That is really what is happening. This is not terrible when you think in numbers and in rates. But when you think in persons, it is terrible. Well, I don't even want to go into the renaissance of solitary confinement. But it's difficult to ignore the rise and the popularity of the so-called supermax prisons And you can read the details about supermax prisons in a lot of places, and you can read them very shortly here in this little article also. You just don't want to be incarcerated in ADX Florence, if possible. The European Court of Human Rights has been occupied with this question because a European terrorist suspect was to be deported to the United States, and terrorists in the United States, especially Islamic terrorists, they stand a fair chance of getting to ADX Florence. And some lawyers in Europe said you cannot send people to these kind of prisons. But then the United States is our ally and our friend, and it's difficult to say why we cannot send people to Europe. Now, in the United States, there has been a lawsuit against supermax prison conditions as being cruel and unusual, and torture, and being a violation of the Torture Convention of the United Nations. And also being a racial discrimination or a religious discrimination, because in many of the supermax prisons, the large majority of inmates is of the Islamic faith. So, is this an anti-Islamic discrimination that we have especially cruel punishments for people of the Islamic faith? Now, and that was pretty critical. But there are also some other peoples in the maximum security prison, like for instance animal rights terrorists. People who want to defend animal rights and they burn stables or something. They use violence, and so they are terrorists because they free animals. And they also go to supermax prisons where they cannot see daylight. They are built in a way that you do not see daylight. Sometimes they are underground, or they are built in a way that you simply do not see the outside. Never. And one guy made it. The name of this guy, we can find the name of this guy too. He is a journalist, really. Will Potter. He made it. He was allowed to visit an inmate in one of the supermax prisons, and so he could get an idea of what it's like. And he overheard guards speaking of inmates and speaking about inmates, and he said, and the guard said, "Oh, this guy is a balancer." Now, what is a balancer? A balancer is somebody who brings things into a balance. And what does he bring into a balance? The ratio between black and white and Islamic and Christian. So the more animal rights people of a Christian faith or a non-faith you have in a supermax prison, the better for the balance between the people from Islam. So we have to put a number of animal rights and other dangerous criminals into the supermax prison, so the ratio between Islam prisoners and non-Islam prisoners is more equal. They are balancers. If we don't put them in the maximum security prison, it gets out of balance, and we get before court and we cannot say, "Oh no, we are objective." So the balancers, they fulfill a very important function. So no court can convict the American prison system of being unbalanced in terms of religious faith and harsh prison conditions. That is what Will Potter found out. He gave a TED talk, which you can easily access on this page. Yeah, I think we're getting to the end. There's so much to talk about personal preferences and likes and not likes. You might get a little tired. Well, you all know the panopticon. There are two types, of course. The Hamburg prison, where Connie works, looks exactly like this. That is the model of the Eastern State Penitentiary that was opened in 1829 in the US state of Pennsylvania. That was then transported to the Pentonville, London Pentonville prison that still exists today and is still working today. And that was opened in 1842, and at that time prisons were the pride of cities and of whole countries. This is why they have nice entrances like a castle, like Versailles almost, you know. And when Pentonville was still under construction and when it was opened, a lot of people, also from Germany, from the royal court, came to see Pentonville because they were interested in how can we build beautiful, progressive, working prisons. That was the innovation that came from Walnut Street, from the Eastern State Penitentiary in 1829 in Pennsylvania, and then it came all over the world. It came to London in 1842, and then this exact model was to be the blueprint for hundreds of prisons that still exist all over the world. And it's small wonder that Hamburg, as a proud city in the 19th century, they said, we also want one of these great, fantastic, expensive prisons, because that was expensive. And that was one of the reasons why it took so long that Hamburg got its own Pentonville-style prison, because it was so expensive. And the Prussian king, he wanted to have a lot of these Pentonville-style. The Prussian king, when he was still the crown prince, he visited Pentonville. He was so enthusiastic about the prison question. He said, yeah, we need one of those, we need one of those. And the parliament didn't want to follow him because they said, you're crazy. We have the indiscriminate warehousing system that works pretty well. Sometimes you beat the hell out of the people, and that is great. And he said, no, I want a progressive, philanthropic, modern prison like Pentonville, like Pennsylvania. And that created a gigantic constitutional crisis in Prussia that was only solved in 1860 by the intervention of Otto von Bismarck, great politician, started a few wars, and he solved the constitutional crisis. And then, starting 1860, slowly people in Prussia, Germany, Hamburg, they were starting to build these expensive prisons. So it was a very big fight of more or less progressive and conservative clerical people to build these prisons against the opposition of the Liberal Party. Okay, and when you come to Hamburg, you go to Hamburg Fuhlsbüttel, and you have exactly the same entrance buildings. They're still there. You have exactly all this. It's still there. A few more buildings, of course, and some things are a little run down, but you still have these things. And in many places of the world, even in India, you find this kind of prison. So much for the success story. Then you have the Supermax. You have the CIA-operated black sites that we don't even want to mention. It's an interesting story. What kind of barbarism has become fashionable over the last decades? One would never have anticipated that. Yeah, then we have the resort prisons. Then I call them the large rundown prisons, and I even give an abbreviation to them, LRDPs. Because, why do I do that? Because not all the prisons in the world today are Pentonville style. Some prisons are just buildings. No panopticon, no Bentham, no Quaker. We need just a place to put them. That's a warehousing sort of thing. And when you want to know what the prison is, then a look at the large rundown prisons shows us where the majority of the 10 million people in prison are. The majority of the 10 million prisoners today, they are not in Pentonville style, they are not in Supermax, Florence style, they are in large rundown facilities that are just incredible. And then you have, and I also had to give the name to them, you have these here. That is Black Beach Prison Bioko in Equatorial Guinea. Not that that is so special, it's just one of a million prisons as they are today in the world. And you don't see Bentham there, you don't see anything. And also you don't see a criminologist. What you see is they are large, they are run down, completely run down, and they are malignant. What is a malignant, large, rundown prison? I had to invent this name after I had read some reports of World Prison Watch sort of thing, people. And I was trying to get a picture of, well, what is a normal prison in statistical terms, you know? A normal prison, like you're in a lottery and you can go anywhere in the world. You have to be a prisoner. You're in a lottery, and now we will take something, and then you are just one of a million people who goes to an average prison. And this is a little substandard, but it's not infrequent. Yeah, I will not even read it. You can read it for yourself. And that is prison. The reality of the prison is not the prison sentence that you read in textbooks of criminologists. It's also not Sykes and Matza, Society of Captives sort of thing. It's that, and nobody describes it, or hardly anybody takes notice of it. But that is what prison means. Okay, here we have one of these countries. Yeah, and then, of course, like with the homicide rates, you have the minorities. In Australia, the big question is it true that the indigenous Australians are the most incarcerated people on earth? And then they go to statistics and they say, yeah, that could be indeed. And in the United States, the question is it true that more black males are in prison than in colleges and universities combined? Yeah, that's awesome. So that's also true. Now the question, of course, for criminologists should be, what are the roots of mass imprisonment? Sure. Yeah, here we get to the drugs again. Increase in drug-related inmates because of expanding drug market, proactive anti-drug policies. You have all these spies and provocateurs, etc. So the more you invest in the investigation of drug crimes, since they are a non-victim, a victimless crime, you don't have a person that comes, oh, I had to buy drugs, I want to, you know. It's a consensual act. And the police, they have to do undercover. The more they do undercover research, the more they do following the drug trade, etc., the more they produce that crime, of course. So it's an interminable market for creating crimes and criminals. So proactive anti-drug policies, counterproductive results of kingpin strategies, that all creates a wave, an ocean of criminals, and that's easy to put in prison, and then they stay there forever because the high minimum sentences, even in Seychelles, they have terrible minimum sentences.